"Do not start the car, sir." Her voice was small, but it sliced through the marble silence of the gala-like glass. The chandeliers trembled faintly from the echo, and every conversation in the grand ballroom died at once. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the little girl standing near the valet entrance, her brown skin glowing in the warm gold light, her small hands clutching the strap of a faded backpack. She looked out of place among the gowns and tuxedos, yet her voice carried a weight that froze even the orchestra mid-note. The billionaire, Alexander Reed, had been mid-laugh, a glass of champagne in hand, surrounded by investors and cameras. His smile faltered. "What did you just say?" he asked slowly. The girl swallowed hard, her breath visible from the cold draft that swept in from the open door. "Please," she said again, louder this time, "do not start the car." Someone put something under it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some laughed nervously, others whispered. Security moved forward. The event host chuckled awkwardly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Honey, you must be mistaken," he said gently, motioning for a guard. "This is a private event." But she did not back away. Her small voice shook, but her eyes stayed fixed on Alexander. "I saw a man under your car," she said. "He left a black bag. He had gloves." The billionaire's jaw tightened. He looked toward the glass doors leading to the circular driveway where his silver sedan waited, gleaming under the chandelier lights. The valet stood nearby, confused. Alexander let out a short laugh, a defense mechanism more than amusement. "Who let her in here?" he demanded. The girl flinched but did not run. "Sir, please," she whispered. "You will not make it home." The room went still again, like the air before a storm. Cameras clicked, phones recorded. Someone muttered, "Is this a prank?" Another voice hissed, "Get her out before the press spins this." The guards approached, but Alexander raised a hand. For the first time, something in her tone unsettled him. The sincerity, the trembling urgency, the way her small chest rose and fell too fast. She was terrified, but not for herself. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lila," she said softly. "My dad used to fix cars. I know that smell." The crowd murmured again. Alexander hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he gestured toward his head of security. "Check it," he ordered. "Right now." Gasps. Even the orchestra players looked up from their instruments. Outside, the winter air bit cold as the security team rushed to the vehicle. The girl stood silent, her fingers twisting the edge of her backpack. 1 minute passed. Then another. The guard returned, pale, breathless. "Sir," he said, his voice low, "there is something under the driver's seat. It looks wired." The ballroom erupted into chaos, shouts, gasps, flashing lights. Alexander turned back toward the girl. She stood completely still, tears welling but unshed. In that single frozen moment, the mighty room that had once echoed with laughter bowed to silence again. The billionaire's voice came out as a whisper. "You just saved my life." And for the first time that night, he meant every word. The night had turned colder after the chaos, but inside the grand ballroom of the Regency Hall, the heat of whispers and flashing cameras made the air thick. The guests had been escorted out. The champagne glasses stood untouched, their bubbles long faded. Alexander Reed sat at one of the long marble tables, his hand pressed to his forehead, trying to make sense of the last half hour. The girl stood near the door, her small frame half hidden behind a velvet curtain, clutching her backpack like a shield. A female police officer knelt in front of her, speaking softly, but Lila barely responded. Her dark eyes flicked between the officer and the billionaire. Alexander's voice broke the quiet. "Is she saying anything?" he asked, his tone still firm but slower now. The officer shook her head. "She is shaken, sir. She keeps repeating that she smelled something wrong, something chemical." Alexander exhaled sharply. "I thought it was madness, but the security team found real wiring. Someone wanted that car to explode the moment I turned the ignition." He rubbed the back of his neck, his mind replaying her trembling voice. "You will not make it home." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Lila, come here." The girl hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. Her shoes squeaked softly on the polished floor. She stopped several feet away. "Who told you to come here?" he asked. "No one," she said quietly. I saw it when the valet parked your car. I was delivering flyers for the shelter, and the man under the car looked wrong. He saw me, and I hid." Her words were steady now, clearer, as if courage was returning. "When you came out, I knew I had to say something." Alexander blinked, leaning back slightly. "You were outside in the cold, handing out papers?" She nodded. "For the winter food drive." A murmur passed between the police officers who were taking notes. The head of security approached, holding a small evidence bag containing a charred black wire. "This was connected to a device under the driver's seat," he said grimly. "Timer-based. Whoever set it knew your route home." Alexander's stomach tightened. "And the man?" "Gone before we got there," the guard replied. The billionaire turned to the girl again, studying her more closely. Her cheeks were smudged with dirt, her hair tied in uneven braids, but there was a calm steadiness in her gaze that reminded him of someone he could not quite place. "Where are your parents, Lila?" he asked gently. She looked down. "My mom is at the shelter. She is sick. My dad," she paused, her fingers tightening on the backpack strap. "He used to work at your factory before it burned down. His name was Owen Carter." The name struck Alexander like a sudden wind. Owen Carter. He remembered the accident, the reports, the loss. He had promised better safety standards after that fire but never followed through. "Your father," he said slowly, "was the mechanic who died in the East Wing fire." Lila nodded once. "He told me that if I ever smelled that gas smell again, I should run and warn someone. I think that is what I smelled tonight." The room fell silent again, but this time it was not out of shock, but something heavier: shame, grief, realization. Alexander's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You saved my life because of what your father taught you." She shrugged lightly. "He said saving people was better than being right." The simplicity of it pierced through the walls he had built around his conscience. Outside, the flashing lights of police cars painted the windows red and blue. The journalists had gathered behind the barriers, shouting questions. Alexander stood, adjusting his suit jacket, and turned to his security team. "Make sure she gets home safely," he said, "and send medical help to her mother." The officer nodded, but Lila's small hand shot up. "No," she said quickly. "You cannot send a big car to the shelter. People will think I did something wrong." Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed determined. Alexander froze, realizing how much thought she had put into a world that had never been kind to her. "Then I will walk you out," he said. The guards tried to object, but he silenced them with a glance. They stepped into the freezing night, the cold wind carrying the sound of distant sirens. The silver car sat cordoned off with yellow tape, its door still open from the inspection. Lila stopped and stared at it. "I was scared," she whispered. "I thought you would yell at me." He gave a small, tired smile. "I did, and I was wrong." She looked up, uncertain. People do not like being told what to do, even if it saves them. "That is true," he said softly. "But sometimes the hardest truth comes from the smallest voice." She blinked, unsure if it was a compliment. "Will I be in trouble?" she asked. "No, Lila," he said, placing his coat gently over her shoulders. "You are the reason I am standing here." They walked together toward the police car that would take her back to the shelter. The world around them still buzzed with noise, cameras, and questions, but inside that quiet stretch of parking lot, only the truth mattered. As the car door closed and she looked out at him one last time, Alexander realized that his life had been saved not only from a bomb but from blindness. Somewhere deep inside, a seed of responsibility began to grow, watered by a child's courage. That night, for the first time in years, Alexander Reed did not return to his mansion. He stayed outside the shelter until dawn, watching the lights flicker on one by one, thinking about a little girl who had risked everything just to be heard. The morning after the explosion attempt, the city awoke to headlines about the billionaire who had almost died and the little girl who had saved him. Reporters camped outside the shelter on Fifth Avenue, their cameras pointed at the faded brick building where Lila and her mother lived. Alexander Reed watched from across the street in his black sedan, not the one that had been tampered with but another brought from his fleet. He had not slept. The images of Lila's frightened face and her trembling voice haunted him. His assistant, Marcus, sat in the passenger seat scrolling through messages. "Sir," The board wants a statement, Marcus said carefully. They are worried about the company's reputation. They suggest we frame it as a security breach, not a human interest story. Alexander shook his head. A human interest story is exactly what it is. He opened the car door and stepped out into the cold. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that promised snow by noon. Across the street, a woman with tired eyes and thin arms stood outside the shelter entrance, talking to a nurse. It was Lila's mother. Her name, he had learned, was Mary Carter. She coughed into a cloth, the sound dry and heavy. He hesitated before walking over, removing his gloves. Mrs. Carter? She looked up, startled. You are? She stopped herself, recognizing him from the television. Mr. Reed. He nodded gently. I wanted to thank you for raising a daughter braver than most adults I know. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. She has always been like that, never afraid to speak up, even when it gets her in trouble. He smiled faintly. Sometimes trouble saves lives. Lila appeared then, holding 2 paper cups of hot cocoa, one clearly meant for her mother. When she saw Alexander, she froze. You came back, she said, her voice small but surprised. I said I would, he replied. May I come in? Inside the shelter, the air smelled of detergent and old blankets. The common room was filled with people huddled around donated heaters. Lila led him to a corner table where a few children were coloring on sheets of paper. She sat down opposite him. They keep showing my face on the news, she said, frowning. The kids at school are laughing. They say I made it up for attention. He shook his head slowly. People always doubt what they do not understand. He reached into his coat pocket and set a small object on the table, a silver badge, tarnished but recognizable. Your father wore this, he said. Lila's eyes widened. That was his work tag. It was found in the investigation files from the factory fire, Alexander explained. I kept it all these years. I do not know why. But now, I think I do. She touched the badge carefully, tracing the worn letters of her father's name. He liked fixing things, she whispered. He said broken things just need patience. Alexander felt a sting in his chest. He was right. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the heaters filled the silence. Then Lila looked up. Are you in trouble because of me? He smiled softly. If telling the truth gets me in trouble, then I deserve it. She looked unconvinced. Grown-ups say that, but they never mean it. He chuckled quietly. Maybe this one does. Just then, Marcus entered the shelter, holding a phone. Sir, the police confirmed it, he said quietly. The explosive was planted by someone inside the company. Alexander's expression hardened. Inside? Marcus nodded. They think it was meant to silence you before the annual audit. The suspect list includes your head of operations. Lila watched his face change. The man with the gray tie? She asked. He was near your car last night. He saw me before I hid. Both men turned to her, startled. Are you sure? Alexander asked. She nodded firmly. He dropped something shiny when he crawled out. It rolled under another car. Marcus immediately called the detectives. Within minutes, officers were on their way. Alexander looked at her again, awe mixing with guilt. You noticed what no one else did? Lila shrugged. People do not see much when they think they are safe. He smiled, a genuine, weary smile. You are your father's daughter. The words made her cheeks flush with quiet pride. Outside, sirens began to approach, echoing off the narrow streets. Alexander stood, buttoning his coat. Lila, I have to go to the police headquarters, but I will come back this evening. Would you let me see how your mother is doing? She nodded. She will like that. She said you used to be on television a lot. That was a long time ago, he said softly. Maybe it is time to be seen for something that matters. As he turned to leave, Lila's small hand caught his sleeve. Mr. Reed, she said, looking up. Are you scared? He paused, then answered truthfully. Yes, but courage is not about not being scared. It is about listening to the right voice when everyone else is wrong. She nodded, as if memorizing it. That is what my dad used to say too. When Alexander stepped back into the street, the snow had begun to fall in gentle flakes, settling on his coat and hair. He looked back once to see Lila standing at the window, waving through the frost. For the first time in many years, He felt something stir inside him that money had never given him purpose. The kind that did not come from power or headlines, but from the quiet truth of a child who refused to stay silent. By late afternoon, the city was draped in a thin blanket of snow, and Alexander Reed stood inside the downtown police headquarters, staring at the evidence laid out on the table. A photograph of the black bag found under his car, a few wires, and a silver tie clip bearing the initials RC. The detective across from him adjusted his glasses and said, "We traced the fingerprints to Robert Crane, your head of operations. He left the country this morning, but airport security is already on alert." Alexander nodded slowly, his jaw tense. "He was like family," he muttered. "I trusted him with everything." The detective leaned forward. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who think they deserve more." When Alexander left the station, the air felt sharper than before. The world outside was moving normally, cars honking, people rushing home, but for him, everything had changed. He called his assistant. "Marcus, cancel all my meetings. I am going to the shelter." When he arrived, the sky was turning orange behind the buildings. The shelter's lights glowed warmly through the frosted windows. He stepped inside carrying 2 grocery bags filled with food, medicine, and a small box wrapped in brown paper. Lila spotted him first. She was helping an elderly man refill his teacup, her braids slightly messy but her smile steady. "You came back," she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I told you I would," he replied. Her mother, Mary, was sitting by the heater with a blanket over her knees. The color had returned slightly to her cheeks. "Mr. Reed," she greeted, her voice still weak but warm. "You did not have to come all the way here." He placed the groceries on the table. "I wanted to make sure you both had what you need." She looked at the bags, her eyes misting. "You already gave enough when you listened to my daughter." Lila peeked into the paper box curiously. Inside was a pair of sturdy snow boots, her size. "For you," Alexander said. "The weather is turning worse." She ran her fingers over the soft lining, whispering a thank you. He smiled. "Consider it a trade for saving my life." Lila tilted her head. "That is not a fair trade. My dad would say a life is worth more than shoes." Alexander chuckled quietly. "Then I will have to find something else to balance it." The sound of laughter from the other side of the room filled the space as volunteers served dinner. He noticed how naturally Lila moved among them, checking plates, helping an old woman carry soup. "She does this every day?" he asked Mary. "Since the shelter opened," Mary replied. "She says helping others makes her forget how small our room is." Her voice softened. She misses her father, but she keeps him alive through her kindness. Alexander felt the weight of those words settle deeply. He had built towers, factories, and headlines, yet this child found meaning in the simplest act of care. When dinner was over, he offered to walk them to their room upstairs. The narrow corridor smelled of detergent and warm bread. Their space was small, 2 single beds, a curtain instead of a door, and a few drawings pinned to the wall. One drawing caught his eye, a man in a blue jumpsuit holding hands with a little girl beside a car. "That was the last thing she drew before the fire," Mary said quietly. "She said it was going to be his birthday card." Lila glanced up. "He was going to teach me how to fix engines." Alexander's throat tightened. "He taught me something too," he said softly. "He taught me what happens when a leader forgets the people who make him who he is." Lila looked puzzled. "Does that mean you were a bad boss?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe, but I want to be better." She nodded with the simple acceptance only children carry. "Then you can start tomorrow." He laughed quietly. "You sound like my old mentor." She shrugged. "Maybe I am just right." They talked until Mary's breathing grew slow with sleep. Before leaving, Alexander turned to Lila. "I will come back in the morning. There is something I want to show you." Her eyes lit up. "Is it another surprise?" "Something like that," he said with a wink. When he stepped outside, snow was falling harder, coating the streetlights in silver halos. Marcus waited in the car, holding a folder. "Sir, the press wants a comment for tomorrow's front page. They are calling her the miracle girl." Alexander smiled faintly, watching his breath curl in the cold air. "Let them. Maybe people need a miracle right now." He looked back at the shelter, where a small shadow still waved from the window upstairs. For the first time in years, He felt that every decision ahead might actually matter. The next morning, he arrived at the shelter again just after sunrise. Lila was waiting at the door, bundled in a scarf too large for her neck. "You said you would show me something," she said eagerly. He nodded. "Come with me." They walked together toward his car, the new one. Spotless, safe, ordinary. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To see where your father worked," he replied. She looked surprised but followed silently. The sun climbed higher as they drove past the skyline, and in that growing light, the world felt a little less divided between rich and poor, wrong and right. It was just two people connected by a truth that had nearly been buried, now finally being brought back into the open. The car slowed as it turned onto a quiet industrial road lined with empty warehouses and overgrown lots. Lila pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide as she took in the tall fences and faded company signs. "This is where my dad worked?" she asked softly. Alexander nodded. "Yes, this was the first factory I ever built. It used to make automotive parts. Your father was one of the best engineers we had." The car stopped in front of a rusted gate marked with a weathered sign that read, "Reed Technologies Plant 1." The letters were chipped, the paint long faded. Alexander got out first and pushed the gate open, the hinges squealing. Snow crunched under his shoes as he led her inside. The air smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. "It looks sad," Lila said quietly, stepping closer. "It is," Alexander replied. "After the fire, I closed it down. I could not bring myself to come back here until today." She turned to look at him. "Why did you come back now?" He hesitated before answering. "Because I needed to remember what was lost and what still matters." They walked past the empty loading docks and into the main hall. The ceiling was high, the beams blackened from the fire years ago. Shafts of sunlight streamed through broken windows, catching the dust that floated like tiny ghosts. Lila picked up a small gear from the ground, turning it over in her gloved hands. "Did my dad touch this?" she asked. "Maybe," Alexander said. "He was the kind of man who made things work when no one else could." He pointed to a corner of the room where a wall had been repainted but never finished. That was his station. He worked there with 3 others. When the fire broke out, he stayed to shut down the machines so the rest could escape. Lila looked at the spot for a long moment. He was brave. "Yes," Alexander said quietly, "and I should have been there that night." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Lila glanced up at him. "You could not have known." He sighed. "Maybe not, but I ignored the warnings. He sent a letter about a faulty circuit, and I thought fixing it could wait until after the audit. That decision cost him his life." Her small hand reached out and tugged gently at his sleeve. "He would forgive you. He always said mistakes are meant to teach, not to punish." Alexander felt the sting behind his eyes, the kind that came when truth met guilt. "Your father raised a very wise daughter." She smiled faintly. "My mom says he raised me to see light and smoke." He chuckled softly, wiping his eyes discreetly. "Then I hope you will help me bring some light back here." Her eyebrows lifted. "What do you mean?" He gestured around the factory. "I want to reopen this place not for machines this time, but for people. A training center for families who lost work after the fire. Your father's name will be on the door." Lila's mouth fell open. "You mean like a school?" "Yes," he said. "A school to fix things, to build again, and to make sure no one gets forgotten." She took a deep breath. "Would kids like me be allowed? Especially kids like you," he said warmly. She beamed, her eyes shining. "Then I can help. I can draw the sign." "You are hired," he said with a smile. As they stood there, the wind blew through the cracked windows, scattering snow across the concrete floor. Alexander picked up a piece of metal and brushed the soot off. "Your father used to say this building had a heartbeat," he said. "I think it just found it again." The sound of distant sirens echoed faintly through the city. But here, in this forgotten space, there was peace. He turned to her. "Lila, there is something else I need to tell you. The man who set up the bomb worked with me for over a decade. I trusted him more than anyone. But your warning saved not just me, it may have stopped something far worse." She frowned. "He was going to hurt other people too?" "Maybe," he said. "Greed makes people forget who they are." She looked down at the gear still in her hand. Then we have to fix them too. He smiled sadly. That may be harder than fixing machines. Maybe not, she said. Machines need hands. People need hearts. He looked at her, struck by how easily she said what he had spent years avoiding. You are right, he said softly. And you just gave me my next project. She grinned. What is it? Building something worth more than profit. They stayed a little longer, walking the perimeter of the old factory until the last of the sunlight dipped behind the skyline. When they returned to the car, Lila turned around for one last look. The building stood silent, but in her eyes, it was alive again. It does not look sad anymore, she said. No, Alexander agreed. It looks like a promise. On the drive back, Lila leaned her head against the window, the rhythm of the tires humming beneath them. Mr. Reed, she said sleepily, do you think my dad knows? He glanced at her reflection in the glass. I think he has known from the moment you spoke up. Her eyes fluttered closed, and within minutes she was asleep. The city lights passed over her face like gentle waves, and for the first time in many years, Alexander Reed felt that redemption did not come from wealth or power, but from the courage of a child who believed in second chances. The next morning came with a pale winter sun rising over the skyline, washing the city in muted gold. At the shelter, the smell of oatmeal and coffee drifted through the narrow halls. Mary Carter woke to find her daughter's bed empty. Panic flashed across her tired face until the door opened and Lila slipped in, her cheeks pink from the cold, carrying 2 paper cups of hot cocoa. Good morning, Mom, she said, setting one on the nightstand. Mr. Reed said he will come by later. Mary exhaled, half relief, half worry. You should not be out so early in the cold. I wore the new boots, Lila replied with a proud smile. They are warm. Across town, Alexander Reed stood by the window of his office, staring at the city below. For the first time in years, he had come to work early, but not to read reports or sign contracts. He held in his hand the old factory's photo, now folded and worn. Marcus entered with a hesitant look. Sir, the board is nervous, he said. The investors think reopening that old factory as a community center is too risky. Alexander turned to face him. The risk is pretending nothing happened. Marcus paused. You are serious about this? Completely, Alexander said. I owe it to Owen Carter. I owe it to his daughter. Before Marcus could respond, the phone rang. It was the police chief. They had located Robert Crane, the man responsible for planting the bomb. He had been caught trying to flee through a private airfield. We will need your statement, the chief said. I will be there, Alexander replied. When he hung up, he looked at Marcus. Get the car ready. But first stop by the shelter. I made a promise. By the time they arrived, the morning snow had melted into slush. Children played near the corner, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. Lila ran out to meet him, her scarf fluttering in the wind. You came back, she said, her eyes shining. I said I would, he replied, kneeling slightly so they were eye level. I need your help again. She blinked, confused. My help? Yes, he said, smiling faintly. You remember the man with the gray tie? The one who saw you that night? She nodded slowly. The police caught him, but they need your help to tell what you saw. Her face grew serious. Do I have to go to a big station? No, he said gently. Just talk to them for a few minutes. You will be safe. I will be with you. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Inside the police building, the air smelled like paper and disinfectant. The detectives treated her kindly, speaking slowly and letting her explain. She described the man's jacket, the shiny tie clip, and the way he crawled under the car. When she finished, one of the officers said, You did very well, young lady. You may have saved more lives than you know. Lila smiled shyly. Outside, Alexander placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You did it again, he said softly. Twice now, you have reminded grown men what courage looks like. She giggled a little. It is just telling the truth. Exactly, he said, something many people forget. They stopped for lunch on the way back, sitting at a small diner with red booths and steaming plates of soup. The waitress brought a slice of apple pie on the house, after recognizing Lila from the news. Lila looked embarrassed. They keep calling me a hero, she said, but I just did what was right. Alexander stirred his coffee. That is what makes you a hero. She looked at him curiously. Do you get scared, Mr. Reed? He smiled faintly. Every day. But people like you remind me that fear can be useful. It tells us what matters most. She thought for a moment. My dad used to say bravery is when your heart beats fast, but your feet do not run. Then he was a wise man, Alexander said. He was my friend, she added quietly, even though you did not know him like I did. His throat tightened. Then maybe I am lucky to know his daughter. Later that evening, he took Lila and her mother to a small apartment he had arranged for them. It was modest, with 2 bedrooms, clean walls, and a view of the river. You cannot stay at the shelter forever, he said. This will be your home for as long as you need it. Mary covered her mouth with trembling hands. Mr. Reed, we cannot accept this. You already have, he said softly. Consider it repayment for a debt I can never truly repay. Lila ran to the window, looking out at the lights flickering on the water. It looks like the stars fell into the river, she said, awe in her voice. Alexander smiled. Then maybe that means something good is starting. She turned toward him. Are you going to keep your promise about the school? Yes, he said. The first day of construction starts next month. It will be called the Carter Center for Renewal. She grinned. That sounds fancy. It sounds right, he said. As the night deepened, Alexander stood by the doorway, watching mother and daughter settle into their new space. There was laughter, the soft kind that fills a room like light. For years he had lived surrounded by wealth and silence. But in that small apartment, he found something he had not felt in a long time: peace. When he finally turned to leave, Lila called out from the kitchen, Mr. Reed, do you think my dad would be proud of me? He looked back, his voice steady but warm. He would be proud of you every single day, and so am I. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere between guilt and grace, Alexander Reed realized that second chances were not given, they were earned through courage, truth, and the kindness of a little girl who refused to stay silent. Winter gave way to the pale thaw of early spring, and for the first time in years, the old Reed Technologies factory echoed again with voices, footsteps, and the rhythmic clang of rebuilding. The once dark windows now caught sunlight, and scaffolding framed the edges like ribs of a new heart. Workers moved with quiet purpose, directed by Alexander Reed himself, who stood in a hard hat and work gloves, a clipboard under his arm. He no longer barked orders, he listened. Beside him, a smaller figure followed closely, her boots crunching on the gravel. Lila wore a yellow hard hat too big for her head and a reflective vest that nearly reached her knees. You look very official, Alexander said with a faint smile. I am your assistant, she replied seriously. You said the first rule of building is to pay attention. That I did, he said. They walked together past the front gate, where a temporary sign hung Carter Center for Renewal. The paint was still wet, but it gleamed proudly. Lila stopped to look at it, her face glowing with quiet pride. It feels like he is here, she said softly. Alexander followed her gaze. I think he would be proud of both of us. Around them, the noise of construction rose: a drill, a hammer, a truck reversing. But underneath it all was something steadier, a heartbeat of progress. Lila watched the workers mix cement and stack beams. They move fast, she said. Because they believe in what they are building, Alexander answered. And because they are being paid fairly this time. She looked at him, eyes wide. You changed the rules? Yes, he said. No shortcuts, no danger. Everyone goes home safe. A gust of wind tugged at her scarf, and she tightened it around her neck. That is what my dad wanted, she said quietly. No more fires, Alexander nodded solemnly. No more fires. Later, during the lunch break, they sat on the steps outside the office trailer, sharing sandwiches from a brown paper bag. Lila swung her legs gently as she ate. Do you miss being in tall buildings? She asked. A little, he admitted. But those buildings never taught me what this place has. She looked curious. What did it teach you? He smiled faintly. That being in charge does not mean being right. And that real strength sometimes comes from listening. She giggled. You sound like my teacher. Then your teacher is very smart, he replied. She leaned her head on her knees. Mr. Reed, can I tell you something? Always, he said. She hesitated. I heard some ladies at the shelter say rich people only help when they want to feel better about themselves. Is that true? He paused, thinking carefully before answering. Some do. I did once. But then I met someone who helped because it was the right thing to do, even when it was scary. She reminded me that real kindness does not look for credit. Lila studied him for a moment, then smiled. You mean me? He laughed softly. Yes, I mean you. The sound of his laughter mixed with the hum of construction, a melody of healing. In the afternoon, a delivery truck arrived carrying large metal panels. One of the workers waved Alexander over. Sir, we need your approval before installation. He walked toward the site, signing the paperwork, unaware that Lila had wandered off to a quieter part of the property near the chain-link fence. There she found a patch of earth where flowers had begun to push through the soil, tiny purple buds surrounded by soot and gravel. She knelt, brushing the dirt gently. When Alexander found her, she looked up and said, Look, they are growing even though the ground was burned. He crouched beside her. Nature does not give up easily. It reminds us that good can grow in the same place where pain once lived. She nodded, thoughtful. Then maybe people can too. He smiled. Maybe they already are. That evening, after the workers left, Alexander unlocked the small office at the edge of the lot and invited Lila and her mother inside. The walls were bare except for a single framed photo the factory crew from years ago, smiling in their blue uniforms. Owen Carter stood in the center. I found this in storage, Alexander said quietly. Mary gasped softly, pressing a hand to her heart. Lila walked closer, tracing her father's face with her fingertip. He looks happy, she whispered. He was, Alexander said. He loved his work. He cared about people. So do you now, Mary said. He looked at her, humbled. I am learning. Before they left, Lila asked if she could keep the photo for one night. I want to show it to everyone at the shelter, she said. They should know what kind of man my dad was. Alexander smiled. Tomorrow it will hang here, on the wall where everyone can see it. She nodded eagerly. As they walked toward the car, the setting sun painted the construction site in gold, the cranes and beams glowing like hope made visible. Lila looked back one last time, the picture clutched to her chest. It is not sad anymore, she said. No, Alexander agreed. It is beginning again. In that quiet moment, he realized something profound. Redemption was not a single act of apology or generosity. It was a series of choices, made day by day, to do better. And as they drove away under the fading orange sky, he thought of the man in the photo and the little girl beside him. One had built machines. The other was rebuilding hearts. For the first time, Alexander Reed understood that both had saved his life in their own way. The following week began with gray skies and the soft hum of rain against the city streets. The construction at the Carter Center slowed because of the weather, but inside the old office building, progress continued. Alexander Reed stood by the window watching workers set up safety signs and new wiring. His reflection looked older, but calmer, as if the burden of the past had finally shifted into something useful. Behind him, Lila sat at a wooden desk, drawing in a notebook. That is a lot of rain, she said without looking up. Maybe the sky is washing everything clean. Alexander turned, smiling. Maybe it is. She looked up from her drawing. Do you think my dad would like all this noise? He laughed softly. He would say it sounds like progress. She nodded. He liked when things made sense. He said machines talk if you listen. Your father was right, Alexander replied. Everything speaks in its own way, even silence. The conversation paused when Marcus entered carrying a folder. Sir, the city inspector will arrive this afternoon, he said. They want to review the safety plans. Good, Alexander said. We will show them that every bolt and wire is secure. Marcus hesitated. There is something else. A delivery came this morning from one of our old suppliers. Someone replaced an order number by mistake. It is marked urgent, but I did not authorize it. Alexander frowned. What kind of delivery? A set of new electrical panels for the lower level, Marcus replied. The invoice came from the old logistics firm that Robert Crane used to manage. The name sent a chill through the room. Alexander's voice lowered. Did you open it? No, Marcus said quickly. It is still sealed in the storage area. Lila looked between them, her expression alert. What is wrong? He forced a calm tone. Probably nothing, but we are going to check it. As they walked toward the back of the building, the air grew cooler. Rain tapped the metal roof above, steady and rhythmic. The delivery crates sat stacked near the loading dock, each labeled with Reed Technologies logos that looked too clean for such an old facility. Alexander crouched and inspected one. The serial code was slightly off, one letter different. Marcus, he said quietly, call the inspector and tell them to bring a bomb squad unit here first. Do not alert the workers yet. Marcus's face went pale. You think? I think we cannot take chances again. Alexander interrupted. Lila stood frozen a few steps behind, her small hands gripping the edge of her vest. It is like before, she whispered. The car, the wires. Alexander turned sharply. Lila, go inside with your mother. Now. No, she said, her voice trembling but firm. If it is like before, maybe I can tell what is wrong. You do not need to, he insisted, but she shook her head. You said everything speaks if you listen. I hear it now, it is humming. He paused. Then he heard it too, a faint electrical buzz coming from inside the crate, almost masked by the rain. He froze, then motioned Marcus back. Everyone out, now. The workers moved quickly, confusion spreading but obedience faster. Lila stayed beside him, refusing to run. Mr. Reed, she whispered. It is under the crate. It is not inside. He crouched, following her pointing finger. There, half buried in the puddled concrete, was a small black box with wires running toward the wooden pallet. He did not touch it, but his eyes widened. You are right, he said softly. You just saved us again. The police arrived within minutes, followed by a bomb disposal team. The site was cleared and cordoned off. Rain continued to fall, dripping from the edges of their coats. The officer in charge approached Alexander after inspecting the device. It was not armed yet, he said, but it was a timer. Whoever placed it knew your construction schedule. Alexander nodded grimly. Someone from the inside again. The officer sighed. Looks like it. We will find them. When the scene finally calmed, Lila stood near the office trailer, drenched but unshaken. Alexander approached her with a blanket. You should have stayed back, he said gently, wrapping it around her shoulders. I could not, she said quietly. I heard it. The sound was wrong. He looked at her with a mix of awe and worry. You have instincts sharper than most adults. I just pay attention, she said simply. He laughed softly, kneeling to meet her eyes. You have taught me more about paying attention than any business school ever did. She smiled, a tired but proud smile. Then maybe you are learning fast. Later that evening, when the site was finally declared safe, Alexander gathered the team and made an announcement. From today forward, every delivery will be double-checked by 2 supervisors, and no crate enters this property without my signature. He paused, glancing toward Lila. And one more thing, we build this center not just for progress, but for truth. Every person here should feel as safe as the families we are trying to help. Applause rippled through the room. Lila leaned against her mother, who whispered, You have a gift, sweetheart. She shook her head. I just listen. As night settled and the workers dispersed, Alexander stood alone by the entrance, watching the flashing police lights fade into the distance. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clear and sharp. He looked at the half-built structure rising before him, a skeleton of steel and hope, and thought of how far they had come since that first night in the ballroom. Beside him, Lila's voice broke the silence. Do you think it will ever stop happening? She asked softly. People trying to hurt you? He sighed. Maybe not. But as long as there are people like you, I think I will always be safe. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. Then I will keep listening. He smiled, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. And I will keep learning. In that moment, under the soft glow of the streetlights, the world felt still again, 2 lives bound by courage, both rebuilding what was once broken. The following morning, the city news channels replayed footage of flashing police lights outside the construction site, and headlines filled the screens with bold letters reading Attempted Sabotage at Carter Center Prevented. In the shelter dining hall, people huddled around a small television set, whispering about the girl in the yellow hard hat who had once again saved a man worth billions. Lila sat quietly beside her mother, her hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa that had long gone cold. She was not smiling, only staring at the screen where her own face appeared for a brief second before the reporter's voice took over. Mary touched her shoulder gently. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. Do not let the noise make you doubt that." Lila nodded, but her eyes stayed distant. "I do not like that everyone keeps looking at me. I did not do it for them." Across town, Alexander Reed sat in a meeting room with city officials, lawyers, and reporters, all speaking at once. The air was tense. "Mr. Reed, your company has been targeted twice in less than a month," a reporter said. "Are you planning to halt construction?" He shook his head firmly. "No. We are going to finish what we started. The Carter Center is more than a building. It is a promise to this city." Another reporter asked, "Who is this child involved in both incidents? Is she under your protection?" His tone was invasive, but Alexander remained calm. "She is a hero," he said simply. "And a friend." That single word, friend, echoed through the room. The next day, a dozen cameras waited outside the shelter. Volunteers tried to wave them away, but the reporters persisted. When Alexander arrived to check on Lila and her mother, he found the doorway crowded. He motioned for security to clear a path, his patience wearing thin. "She is a child," he said to one of the journalists. "Show some decency." Once inside, he found Lila sitting by the window, sketching quietly. She looked up when she heard his voice. "They will not stop coming," she said softly. "Maybe they will, if we give them something better to talk about," he replied. She tilted her head. "Like what?" He smiled faintly. "Like hope." Later that afternoon, Alexander called a press conference on the steps of City Hall. The rain had cleared, leaving the air crisp and clean. Cameras lined the sidewalks. He stood behind the podium, Lila and Mary beside him. "This city has seen enough of greed and fear," he began. "It is time to rebuild not only our buildings but our trust." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This young girl reminded me that truth is not always loud, but it is powerful. Because of her, I stand here today to announce that the Carter Center for Renewal will open as scheduled, and it will offer free safety training for every worker in this city who needs it." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. Lila squeezed her mother's hand, unsure what to say. Alexander continued, "We will honor Owen Carter's legacy not with statues or speeches but with action, and this center will bear his name as a symbol of courage, compassion, and second chances." Applause began to grow, first soft, then thunderous. Lila looked up at him, a small smile breaking through. After the conference, they walked together along the quiet street behind City Hall. The chaos of cameras faded into the distance. "You spoke like you meant every word," she said. "I did," he replied, "because I finally understand what your father tried to teach me years ago." She looked at him curiously. "What was that?" "That people matter more than profit. That saving one life is worth more than building 10 towers." She thought about that, then said, "He used to say things like that too, but people did not listen." "I am listening now," Alexander said softly. A week later, news coverage began to shift. The story was no longer about the billionaire's near death but about the community project that promised to change lives. Donations poured in from across the city. Volunteers signed up to teach classes, and companies pledged to improve their safety standards. But amid all the attention, one evening brought a quiet shock. When Alexander arrived home, he found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message typed in black ink. "You were warned once. Stop digging, or next time the child will not be lucky." His stomach tightened. He looked out into the night through the tall glass windows of his apartment, the city glowing below. Fear flickered through him, not for himself but for her. The next morning, he visited the shelter again. Lila was reading in the corner, her boots resting on a small stool. She looked up as he entered and immediately sensed something different in his face. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, "Nothing you need to worry about, but I think we should have you and your mother stay somewhere safer for a while." She frowned. You mean leave the shelter? Just until things calm down. She shook her head firmly. The people here need my mom. She helps in the kitchen every day. Her tone was steady, more mature than her years. And I am not scared. Bad people do not win if good people stop trying. He stared at her for a moment, speechless. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that came from pride and heartbreak mixed together. You sound like your father again, she shrugged. Maybe I am just listening. That night, Alexander made a decision. He called Marcus and the police chief, ordering 24-hour surveillance at the construction site and around the shelter. He refused to let fear dictate the next chapter. As he sat alone in his office later, the sound of the rain returned, soft but persistent. He looked at a photo on his desk, Lila and her mother standing in front of the half-built Carter Center, smiling under hard hats. The storm outside might still rage, but inside that frame was something unbreakable. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed did not feel alone. He felt protected not by guards or walls, but by the memory of a man who believed in truth and the courage of a little girl who carried that belief forward like a torch that could not be extinguished. The following days unfolded under a heavy sky that seemed to hang lower than usual, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The warning letter remained on Alexander Reed's desk. Its words burned into his mind like an echo he could not silence. Yet outside the glass walls of his office, life continued. The Carter Center rose beam by beam, and the sound of progress drowned out the whisper of fear. Early one morning, Lila arrived at the site with a backpack full of drawings. She had insisted on coming despite the gray weather. I made a picture for the wall, she said as she climbed out of the car. Alexander smiled faintly, taking the roll of paper she offered. Let us see what you have created. He unrolled it carefully to reveal a hand-drawn poster, showing two hands, one large, one small, reaching toward each other under the words, "Courage builds what fear destroys." The letters were uneven but bold, outlined in red marker. For a moment, he said nothing, then nodded slowly. That will hang in the lobby. Lila grinned. Good, because I stayed up all night finishing it. He laughed softly. Then it belongs here. Workers nearby paused to look at them, smiling as they passed. The site had become a place where hope felt visible, stitched into every new wall and window. Yet beneath that hope, Alexander carried a quiet dread. The police had traced the threatening note to a burner phone purchased near the airport. It led nowhere. He refused to tell Lila, not wanting to shadow her courage with his fear. That afternoon, as the sky darkened with rain again, the sound of thunder rolled across the city. Most of the workers had left early, but Alexander stayed behind to review blueprints in the small office beside the loading dock. He barely noticed Lila enter until she placed a steaming cup of cocoa beside him. You forgot lunch, she said, frowning in mock disapproval. He smiled. You are becoming my assistant again. Someone has to make sure you eat, she said, sitting on a stool beside him. You look tired. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. I am just thinking too much. She tilted her head. About the bad people? He looked at her, startled, but she did not flinch. I saw the police car outside last night, she continued quietly. Mom said you were making sure everyone was safe. That means you are worried. He sighed, the truth slipping out before he could stop it. I am, Lila, because sometimes when you try to do good, people who love lies get angry. She considered this for a moment, then said, My dad used to say lies are afraid of the light. Maybe that is why you scare them. He smiled faintly, touched by her simple wisdom. Then we must keep the lights on. Just then, Marcus rushed in, slightly out of breath. Sir, the electricians found something behind the north wall, an old safe, hidden in the foundation from before the renovation. It has your father's initials on it. Alexander stood immediately. My father? Yes, Marcus said. It looks sealed tight. Lila's eyes widened. Maybe it is treasure. He chuckled. Knowing my father, it is more likely paperwork. They followed Marcus to the north wing, where workers had cleared an area near the stairwell. Embedded in the concrete was a metal door the size of a suitcase, tarnished with age. The initials A.R. were barely visible. With some effort, they pried it open. Inside lay a small leather pouch and an old photograph covered in dust. Alexander brushed it gently, revealing an image of the original factory crew from decades earlier. His father stood in the middle, arm around a man who looked strikingly like Owen Carter. "That is your dad," Lila whispered in awe. Alexander nodded slowly. "They knew each other long before I met him. My father must have hidden this during the first construction." He opened the pouch and found a letter folded neatly inside. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but readable. As he read, his throat tightened. It was from his father, written years before his passing. "If you ever find this, son," it began, "remember that building something worth keeping is not about strength but about trust. Do not forget the people who hold you up while you stand tall." His eyes glistened. Lila looked up at him. "He was telling you what my dad told me." "Yes," he said quietly. "I think they both wanted the same thing for us to listen." That evening, as rain poured harder, Alexander placed the photograph and the letter in a glass frame. He hung it near the entrance, beneath Lila's poster. The two images, one drawn by a child, one captured from the past, seemed to speak to each other across time. Workers passing by stopped to look, moved without words. Lila stood beside him, her voice soft but certain. "Now they are both part of it." "Yes," he said, "and so are you." The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days, casting a golden glow over the construction site. Reporters who had once come searching for scandal now came to film the transformation. Children from the neighborhood gathered by the gates, waving at the workers. Lila stood near the fence, holding her mother's hand, her face bright. She did not know about the danger that had brushed past them, or the fear that still lingered in Alexander's chest. All she knew was that something beautiful was being built, something her father would have believed in. And as Alexander looked out over the site, where beams caught the light like mirrors of hope, he realized that the true foundation of the Carter Center was not steel or concrete, but the courage of a little girl who had taught him that even after fire and fear, something pure could still rise again. 2 weeks later, the air around the construction site smelled of new paint and fresh lumber, the kind of scent that promised completion. The Carter Center was nearly finished, and every morning began the same way with Lila arriving before sunrise. Her backpack filled with sketches, and her heart filled with curiosity. She would walk beside Alexander Reed, asking questions about everything from safety codes to how cement hardened. He always answered with patience, amused by how her mind worked like an engineer's. "You remind me of your father more each day," he said one morning as they watched the electricians install the last of the lights. Lila smiled shyly. "Mom says he liked to fix things because broken things made him think." "Maybe I am like that too." "You definitely are," Alexander replied. They walked into the main hall, where the sunlight from the tall glass windows fell directly onto two framed pieces on the wall, the old photograph of Owen Carter and the handwritten letter from Alexander's father, now joined by Lila's poster that read, "Courage builds what fear destroys." The workers passed beneath them with quiet reverence, as if the building itself carried a soul. Lila stopped and pointed at the photo. "He looks happier now that he is on the wall," she said earnestly. Alexander smiled at her simple truth. Maybe he is. That afternoon, a local news crew arrived to document the final stages of construction. They interviewed several workers, then asked to speak with Lila. She hesitated at first, glancing at Alexander. "Only if it is okay," she said. "It is more than okay," he replied. The reporter knelt to her level, microphone in hand. "Lila, you have been called a hero twice now. How does it feel to know you helped save lives?" Lila looked thoughtful. "I did not save anyone," she said. "I just said something when I saw something wrong. My dad taught me that silence can hurt people too." The reporter smiled, surprised by her wisdom. "That is a powerful lesson," he said. "It is not mine," she replied simply. "It is his." When the segment aired that evening, the city reacted with warmth instead of gossip. Donations for the Carter Center doubled overnight, and volunteers from neighboring states reached out to join. Alexander watched the broadcast from his office, pride swelling in his chest. "She has become the voice this city needed," Marcus said beside him. "No board meeting could have done this." "No," Alexander agreed softly. "Only truth could." A few days later, Lila invited him to the small apartment he had helped them move into. Mary Carter had prepared soup and cornbread, insisting he stay for dinner. The room was filled with the sound of quiet laughter and the hum of normal life. After dinner, Lila brought out a small wooden box from under her bed. "I want to show you something," she said. Inside were trinkets, her father's old wrench, a photograph of the three of them before the fire, and a piece of charred metal shaped like a heart. "I kept this from the night we lost everything," she explained. "It was from his workbench. I thought if I held on to it, maybe he could find us again." Alexander's throat tightened. "He found you," he said softly, "and now everyone knows who he was." She nodded slowly, placing the heart-shaped metal in his hand. "You can keep it for the center," she said. "Maybe it will protect it." "Are you sure?" he asked. "It means a lot." "So does the center," she replied. He closed his hand around the small piece of metal, feeling its weight. "Then I will make sure it stays safe." That night, when he returned to the construction site, he walked through the nearly completed halls, the echo of his footsteps mingling with the faint hum of the new electrical systems. He placed the charred metal heart beneath the framed photograph of Owen Carter and whispered quietly, "Thank you." The next morning, the official inspection was scheduled. The city officials arrived with clipboards and stern expressions, but the mood quickly softened as they toured the building. Every safety measure was met, every plan perfectly executed. One of the inspectors smiled. "Mr. Reed, this is remarkable. You have turned a tragedy into something this city will talk about for generations." Alexander nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the door where Lila stood watching proudly, her mother beside her. "I did not do it alone," he said. When the final approval stamp was placed on the documents, the workers erupted in cheers. Lila ran forward, throwing her arms around Alexander's waist without hesitation. "We did it," she exclaimed. He laughed, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, we did. Now it is real," she said, eyes shining. "Now it belongs to everyone." He nodded. "Exactly." As the celebration continued, Alexander stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sawdust and rain. The city skyline stretched before him, glowing in the afternoon light. He felt something deep within him settle, an old ache replaced by gratitude. When he turned back, Lila was at the doorway, waving. "Mr. Reed," she called out. "Come back inside. We are naming the rooms." He laughed. "What did you name them?" "The big one is called Hope Hall," she said proudly, "and the small one for kids is called the Workshop. Mom said it sounds like something Dad would like." His smile widened. "He would love that." As he followed her inside, the light through the windows grew golden, catching the framed photograph once more. For a fleeting moment, it looked as if the two men in the picture, his father and hers, were standing side by side, watching them. And in that quiet reflection, Alexander Reed understood that the building was no longer a monument to his guilt, but a living bridge between the past and the future, built by courage, forgiveness, and the voice of one small girl who refused to let silence win. The evening before the grand opening arrived with soft light spilling over the nearly completed Carter Center. The sound of sweeping brooms and distant laughter filled the air as volunteers placed the last chairs and banners in the main hall. Lila walked slowly across the polished floor, admiring how everything sparkled under the new chandeliers. She wore a simple blue dress that matched the color of the sky just before dusk. Her small hands brushed over the edge of the podium, where Alexander Reed would speak in less than 24 hours. "It is hard to believe this was once broken," she said quietly. Alexander stood nearby, watching her with a gentle smile. "Everything that breaks has a chance to be made new again," he said. "Including people." She turned to face him. "You mean you?" He chuckled softly. "Yes, me and maybe all of us." She grinned. "Mom says you talk like one of those teachers who want everyone to do their homework." "Maybe I am still learning my own lessons," he replied. Mary Carter approached, her steps slow but steady. She looked stronger now. Her color returned, her eyes clear. "It looks beautiful," she said softly, her gaze drifting over the hall. "I can almost hear Owen's voice in here." Alexander nodded. "It is his voice that built this, even if he never saw it finished." She smiled gently. "He would be proud of what you and my daughter have done." "It was your daughter who reminded me what pride should mean," he said, looking toward Lila. The little girl blushed and quickly looked away, pretending to fix a banner. When the sun set completely, the city lights reflected through the tall glass windows, turning the room into a sea of gold and silver. The workers and volunteers began to leave, one by one, until only the three of them remained. Lila sat on the stage, her legs dangling off the edge, her gaze lost in the glow of the city beyond. "Mr. Reed," she asked, her voice soft, "do you still think about that night, the one when I yelled in front of everyone?" He hesitated before answering. "Every single day," he said, "not because of fear anymore, but because it was the moment my life changed." "Mine too," she said, swinging her feet. "Before that, I thought no one ever listened to me. And now?" he asked. She looked at him and smiled. "Now I think maybe words can build things too." He nodded. "They can. The right words can save lives." For a long moment, they sat in silence, just listening to the hum of the city. Then Mary said softly, "You know, Lila's father once said something similar. He told her that kindness is the loudest voice in a noisy world." Alexander smiled faintly. He was right, and tomorrow, the whole city will hear that voice. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the world itself had decided to celebrate. Crowds began to gather outside the Carter Center, hours before the ceremony. Reporters, families, city officials, and workers all stood together, waiting. Inside, Alexander paced near the podium, his speech folded neatly in his hand. His heart pounded with anticipation and humility. Lila peeked in from the side door, wearing a white ribbon in her hair. "You look nervous," she said. "I am," he admitted. "I have given hundreds of speeches, but none like this one." She grinned. "Then you should start the way I did." "How is that?" he asked. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and said firmly, "Speak like you mean to save someone's life." He laughed softly. "That is good advice." When the ceremony began, applause filled the air as Alexander stepped to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, workers in uniforms, mothers with children, city leaders, and at the very front, Lila and her mother. His voice trembled slightly at first, but steadied as he began. "This building is more than walls and windows," he said. "It is a promise that no life, no mistake, no tragedy is beyond redemption. It is named for a man who gave his life protecting others, and it stands because of a child who reminded us all what courage looks like." The crowd turned their eyes toward Lila, who shifted shyly in her seat. "Owen Carter believed in people," Alexander continued, "and his daughter reminded me to do the same. The Carter Center will not only teach skills, it will teach listening, kindness, and the value of every voice." Applause rose, echoing against the high ceilings. Lila looked up at her mother, tears bright in her eyes. Mary squeezed her hand, whispering, "He said it right." After the ceremony, people flooded the hall, exploring classrooms, workrooms, and community spaces. Children ran through the corridors, laughing, their shoes clicking against the tile floors. Lila led a small group of younger kids toward the photo wall. "This is my dad," she said proudly, pointing to the framed picture. "He fixed things that were broken. Now this place will fix people too." One of the children asked, "How can a building fix people?" Lila smiled, "Because it teaches them not to give up." Outside, Alexander stood under the sunlight, greeting guests and shaking hands. The mayor approached him, saying, "This center will change lives, Mr. Reed. You have done something remarkable." Alexander looked toward the window where Lila stood with the children. "No," he said softly. "She did something remarkable. I just followed her lead." As the crowd began to thin and the laughter echoed faintly through the halls, Alexander walked back inside and looked once more at the photograph wall. The letter from his father, the picture of Owen, and Lila's poster hung side by side. Together, they told a story not of power, but of transformation. And as the last rays of sunlight touched the words, "Courage builds what fear destroys," Alexander Reed knew that tomorrow would no longer be about rebuilding a factory, it would be about rebuilding faith. And this time, he was ready to listen to every small voice that dared to speak the truth. The days following the grand opening of the Carter Center were filled with a kind of quiet joy that Alexander Reed had never known before. Each morning, he arrived early to watch the first groups of trainees file in, men and women in worn jackets. single mothers balancing schedules, young apprentices eager to learn something that could change their lives. The classrooms buzzed with energy, machines hummed with purpose, and laughter began to replace the echoes of sorrow that had once haunted the walls. Lila came every day after school, her backpack bouncing as she ran up the steps to greet him. "Mr. Reed," she would call, "guess what we learned today?" And every time, he stopped whatever he was doing to listen. He had learned that listening was the foundation of every good thing they built together. On one bright afternoon, the mayor and several city leaders visited the center to tour the new programs. They stopped at a classroom where Lila was helping other children design small model bridges from recycled materials. Her eyes sparkled with focus, her small hands steady as she explained how support beams worked. The mayor leaned toward Alexander and whispered, "You are looking at a future engineer." Alexander smiled. "I think we are looking at a future leader." Later that day, he gathered the staff in the main hall to make an announcement. The hall still smelled faintly of sawdust and new paint, but it felt alive. "We are starting a scholarship program in Owen Carter's name," he said. "Each year, it will support young students who want to study engineering, safety design, or community development." The crowd applauded warmly. Lila looked stunned. "Does that mean kids like me can go to college?" she asked. Alexander smiled. "Exactly. That is the goal." Her mother, standing nearby, wiped a tear from her cheek. "You have no idea what this means to families like ours," she said softly. "Yes, I do," Alexander replied, "because your family reminded me why this place exists." The following week, a photographer came to capture images for a magazine feature. Alexander disliked attention, but he agreed because it would help promote the center's mission. During the session, the photographer asked to include Lila in a few shots. She stood beside him proudly, holding a wrench from one of the classrooms. "Smile," the photographer said, and they did two people from different worlds bound by a shared truth. That evening, when the photos were printed, one image stood out. It showed Alexander looking down at Lila as she looked up at him, the Carter Center's glass walls shining behind them. The caption read, "Kindness is the blueprint." The next morning, that image appeared on the front page of the local newspaper. Calls poured in from across the country, companies wanting to partner, schools asking for mentorship programs, volunteers offering to help expand the model to other cities. For the first time, Alexander realized that what began as an act of redemption had become a movement of change. That night, after everyone had gone home, he walked through the quiet halls alone. The hum of the lights was the only sound. He paused in front of the photograph wall, the letter from his father, the picture of Owen Carter, and Lila's poster. He whispered, "We did it." Behind him came a small voice. "You are talking to the wall again," Lila said with a giggle. He turned to see her standing by the door, holding a paper folder. "I thought you went home hours ago," he said. "I forgot to give you this," she replied, walking up to him. Inside the folder was a hand-drawn certificate. Across the top in bold crayon letters it read, "The Helper Award." Underneath, in her neat handwriting, were the words, "To Mr. Reed, for fixing hearts, not just buildings." He knelt down so their eyes met. "This means more than any award I have ever received," he said sincerely, "because it came from the person who taught me how to help." She grinned, her dimples showing. "Then you have to hang it on the wall too. Right next to your poster," he promised. They walked to the frame together, and he placed the certificate beside her drawing. For a long moment, they stood side by side, admiring how the words, "Courage builds what fear destroys," seemed to glow a little brighter next to the new addition. "You know," he said quietly, "when I started this, I thought I was building something to honor your father, but now I see it honors everyone who believes in doing good even when it is hard." Lila looked up at him. "Then it honors you too." He smiled and shook his head. "It honors us." The following morning, the center hosted its first official workshop, teaching families how to maintain safe heating systems for the winter. Lila helped hand out brochures while Alexander spoke to the crowd. He ended his talk with a story about a man who once ignored a warning and how a little girl's courage gave him a second chance to listen. The room was silent for a moment before applause broke out. Lila beamed, standing near her mother, her heart full. As the day ended and the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting the center in a warm golden glow, Alexander stood by the main doors, watching families leave with smiles. He looked down at the small figure beside him. "We did something good today," he said. "We did something right," Lila corrected. He laughed. "You are right again." "I usually am," she said, pretending to sound serious. He nodded. "Yes, you are." And as they watched the last visitors disappear into the twilight, the building behind them hummed with life, a testament to the power of truth, kindness, and a child's bravery that refused to be silenced. For Alexander Reed, redemption was no longer just a word. It was the sound of laughter echoing through the halls of a place once built from guilt but reborn in grace. Autumn settled softly over the city, painting the streets in shades of amber and rust. The Carter Center thrived, its glass walls glowing like lanterns against the early dusk. Inside, the sound of tools, laughter, and learning filled every hallway. The place had become a heartbeat for the community, a space where people rebuilt not just skills, but their sense of worth. Alexander Reed walked the halls with quiet pride, his once stern face softened by months of change. Every day he stopped to greet the workers, ask questions, and listen to stories that reminded him of why the center existed. On one particular afternoon, he stood outside a classroom where Lila was leading a group of younger children through a small project. They were building miniature bridges from popsicle sticks and glue. "Make sure your supports are even," she told them, her tone patient but firm. "If one side is weak, the whole bridge will fall." Alexander leaned against the doorframe, smiling. "Sounds like an engineer to me," he said. She looked up, grinning. "I learned from the best," he chuckled. "Your father would be proud of that. And you too," she added. "You fixed your bridge." He paused. "My bridge? Between your heart and other people," she said simply. The words hit deeper than she could know. Later that day, Alexander hosted a meeting with city leaders and donors. They discussed expanding the Carter Center's model to other neighborhoods, even other states. "What you have built here could change countless lives," one of the officials said. "Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" Alexander smiled faintly. Responsibility is easier to carry when it is shared. When the meeting ended, he found Lila sitting on the front steps of the building, kicking at the leaves that had blown in from the street. The late afternoon sun turned her hair into a halo of light. "You were in there for hours," she said. "Grown-ups talk a lot." "We do," he admitted. "Sometimes too much." "So, what did they say?" "They want to make more centers like this one," he explained. Her eyes widened. "More places to help people?" "Exactly," he said. "But it will take time, money, and people who care enough to keep listening." She thought for a moment, then said, "You already have those things." "Do I?" he asked, amused. "You have time because you learned to slow down," she said, counting on her fingers. "You have money because you are still rich, and you have people because now they trust you." He laughed, shaking his head. "You always find the truth hiding between my excuses." "That is my job," she said proudly. "I am your truth detector." "And a very good one," he said. A gust of wind scattered leaves across the steps, and Lila chased one down, catching it before it blew away. She held it up, its edges golden and torn. "Even the broken ones are still beautiful," she said. "Kind of like people." Alexander nodded slowly. "You see the world clearly, Lila. Never lose that." As twilight deepened, Mary came to collect her daughter. Before they left, she thanked Alexander for hiring her as a full-time coordinator for the family outreach program. "I never imagined I would find purpose again," she said. "You did not find it," he replied. "You created it." She smiled and squeezed his hand before guiding Lila home. That night, the center emptied, leaving only the hum of the lights and the faint echo of voices that still lingered in the air. Alexander sat in his office, reviewing blueprints for new centers across the state. His phone buzzed a message from Marcus, who was managing operations remotely. It read, "Construction teams ready in 2 more cities. Congratulations, Alex. You have started a movement." He stared at the message, then glanced at the photograph wall. The images seemed to glow softly in the dim light, the faces of his father, Owen Carter, and Lila's bright poster. he whispered. No, we started it. The next morning, the first cold wind of November swept through the city. Lila arrived early, wearing a thick red scarf and mittens that looked 2 sizes too big. She carried a notebook filled with sketches. What do you have there? Alexander asked. She opened it to a page showing a design for a playground. I thought the kids who come here should have a place to play too. Dad said play helps people think better. Alexander studied the drawing. It was simple but clever swings shaped like gears. A slide that curved around like a spiral beam. This is brilliant, he said. Do you think we can build it? If we build it together, she said confidently, like everything else. He smiled. Then we will make it happen. Over the next few days, workers cleared space behind the center to begin the small playground project. The community came together again, parents, children, and volunteers, all led by the smallest architect among them. Lila directed where benches should go, and Alexander helped pour cement for the base. When the final piece was in place, she stood proudly with her hands on her hips. Now it is perfect, she said, because it is for everyone. As they admired the finished playground, Alexander said quietly, You know, when we first met, I thought I was saving you. She looked up at him with a knowing smile. But I was saving you, she said. He laughed softly. Yes, you were. The wind rustled the swings behind them, and for a moment the sound resembled distant laughter like the echo of those who had once built before them. Alexander looked at the sky, then at the girl beside him. Lila, he said, do you know what you have really built? She shook her head. What? A future, he said, one that your father would be proud to live in. The sun dipped low, painting the playground in shades of gold and orange. Lila picked up a fallen leaf, pressed it into her notebook, and whispered, Then let us keep building. And with that, they walked back toward the glowing windows of the Carter Center, their shadows stretching long and steady behind them. Proof that light always returns to the places once lost in darkness. Winter came early that year, wrapping the city in a hush of white snow and soft winds. The Carter Center glowed like a beacon against the gray sky, its tall windows spilling golden light onto the frozen ground. Inside, warmth filled every room, children's laughter, the clinking of tools, and the murmur of people learning side by side. The newly built playground sat dusted with snow, its swings still, waiting for spring. Lila arrived each morning bundled in layers, her red scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck. She carried her sketchbook everywhere, the edges worn from months of use. You are early again, Alexander Reed said one morning, holding a steaming cup of cocoa for her. You beat even the janitor. She grinned. I could not sleep. I had an idea for the garden. The garden? He asked, curious. She nodded eagerly, flipping open her sketchbook. On the page was a plan for a small greenhouse beside the playground. We can grow flowers and vegetables, she explained. The kids can learn how to take care of something living. Alexander studied the drawing, impressed by her imagination. You have a way of making everything grow, he said. She laughed. That is what my mom says about you. The center had become a second home for both of them. For Lila, it was a place where her father's spirit lived on. For Alexander, it was the redemption he never thought he would find. The two of them had become inseparable, a little girl with endless faith, and a man who had learned how to hope again. One afternoon, as the snow thickened outside, the staff gathered in the main hall for the winter celebration. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, and a pine tree stood in the corner decorated with handmade ornaments. Lila and the children had crafted them from recycled materials, each one carrying a small message written in marker. Some said hope, others kindness, and one, written in Lila's careful handwriting, said listen. When the lights dimmed, Alexander stepped up to speak. This time last year, he began, this building was only a dream. Now it is alive because of every one of you, but most of all, because of one small voice that refused to stay silent. He gestured toward Lila, who blushed as the crowd applauded. She reminded me that courage does not always roar, he continued. Sometimes, it whispers, and when it does, we must be wise enough to hear it. After the applause faded, the celebration continued with music and laughter. Lila danced with the other children, her scarf trailing behind her like a comet. Alexander watched her, his heart full. For years, His world had been numbers and deals, but now it was moments like these, simple, real, and full of light. Later that evening, as the guests left and the snow fell heavier, Lila approached him with a small box wrapped in silver paper. "It is for you," she said. "For Christmas." He smiled. "You did not have to get me anything." "I wanted to," she said, placing it in his hands. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small key attached to a tag that read, "Storage Room Number 3. "What is this?" he asked, puzzled. "Go see," she said with a grin. He walked down the hall, Lila following close behind. The storage room was dimly lit, its door marked with the number 3. When he turned the key, the light flickered on, revealing a wooden table in the center of the room. On it was a model of the Carter Center, built entirely from cardboard, paint, and glue. It was detailed, even including tiny windows, the playground, and the greenhouse from her new drawing. "You made this?" he asked, stunned. She nodded proudly. "With help from the kids, we wanted to make sure you never forget what you built." His voice softened. "What we built," he corrected. He crouched beside her, his eyes misting. "This is the best gift I have ever received." She smiled shyly. "Even better than your fancy awards?" "Much better," he said. "Those were for things I did alone. This one is for something we made together." The two of them stood there quietly, looking at the model as if it held the heartbeat of everything they had fought for. "Mr. Reed," Lila said after a moment, "do you ever miss your old life? The big office, the parties, the suits?" He thought about it, then shook his head slowly. "No, I used to think success was measured in numbers, but now I know it is measured in names, the people we help, the lives we change, the ones we remember." "Like my dad," she said softly. "Yes," he said, "like your dad." A gust of wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Snow began to drift through the cracks around the door, but inside the storage room, there was warmth. Lila reached for his hand. "You kept your promise," she said. "You built something good." He squeezed her hand gently. "You helped me keep it." She smiled, her eyes shining. "Then we should make a new promise." "What kind of promise?" "That we keep listening," she said. "No matter how big or loud the world gets, we always listen for the truth." He nodded, smiling. "That is a promise I can keep." They walked back toward the main hall, the sound of snow crunching under their feet. Behind them, the tiny cardboard Carter Center stood under the warm light, a symbol of everything they had lost and found again. Outside, the city slept under a blanket of white, unaware that in one small corner of it, two people, a man once lost and a child full of grace, had rebuilt, not just a building, but the meaning of redemption itself. January arrived with quiet mornings and skies the color of silver. Snow still covered the city, but the streets were slowly waking from the holiday hush. The Carter Center buzzed again with new energy, its doors reopening after the short winter break. Inside, heaters hummed and footsteps echoed against the newly waxed floors. Alexander Reed stood in the main hall with a clipboard, greeting volunteers who had returned early. His breath fogged slightly in the cold air that slipped through the entryway each time the doors opened. "Welcome back," he said to each of them, shaking hands, smiling, something he had once forgotten how to do. At the far end of the hall, Lila burst through the doors carrying her backpack and a thermos of cocoa. "Mr. Reed," she called, her voice bright. "Guess what day it is?" He smiled. "Let me guess. The day I finally get to rest?" "No," she said, laughing. "It is my dad's birthday." The words softened the air around them. Alexander's expression gentled. "Then we must celebrate it properly." "Mom made cupcakes," she said proudly, unzipping her backpack and showing a container filled with small, uneven cakes, topped with colored sprinkles. "I helped, but mine look kind of funny." "Then they will taste perfect," he said, taking one carefully. "What would you like to do for him today?" She thought for a moment, her eyes glinting with mischief. "I want to plant something. He used to say every birthday should leave something growing behind." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Then the garden you dreamed of is the perfect place to start." They walked outside to the small patch of land beside the playground, where the snow lay untouched and glittering under the pale Sunday. Alexander handed her a small trowel and stepped back, watching as she knelt in the snow, brushing it aside to find the soil beneath. "It is cold," she said, giggling. "It will wake the earth up," he replied. Together they planted a few hardy seeds that would bloom come spring. When they finished, Lila pressed her gloved hands over the soil. "Happy birthday, Dad," she whispered. The wind blew gently, as if carrying her words upward. Alexander stood quietly beside her, his chest tight with emotion. "He would be proud of you," he said softly. "And of your mother." She smiled. "He would be proud of you too. You made his dream big enough for everyone." "No," Alexander said. "You did that." They returned inside, their cheeks flushed from the cold. The center smelled of warm bread from the community kitchen, and somewhere down the hall, someone played a soft tune on a guitar. It felt like home. Later that afternoon, the winter sun dipped early, painting long orange shadows across the floor. Lila sat at her usual table, drawing something in her sketchbook. "What are you working on now?" Alexander asked. She turned the book toward him. On the page was a drawing of the Carter Center, but above it, she had drawn wings. "It looks like it is flying," he said, smiling. "That is because it is," she explained. "It is helping people in other cities now. Mom said they opened a new one in Denver last week." "They did," he confirmed, "and 2 more will begin construction this spring." She looked up at him. "Are you going to visit them all?" "Eventually," he said, "but this one will always be my home base." "Because it is where you changed," she said simply. He met her eyes, the truth of her words sinking in. "Yes," he said, "because it is where I learned what matters." Evening fell, and the volunteers began to leave one by one. Alexander and Lila stayed behind to help Mary clean up the kitchen. As they worked, laughter filled the air light and unguarded. When the last dish was dried and the lights dimmed, they stood together near the entrance. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" Lila asked suddenly. "When I grow up, when you get old," he chuckled, "you think I will ever stop working?" "Maybe not," she said with a grin, "but I mean when life changes again." He grew quiet for a moment. "Then I will hope the things we built will keep helping people, and I will hope you never stop believing in the power of good." "I will not," she said. "You cannot forget the things that change your heart." He smiled. "You are very wise for someone your age." "That is because I have a lot of teachers," she said proudly. "You, Mom, my dad, everyone who listens." He looked at her, realizing that in all his years of success, he had never taught anyone something as important as what she had taught him, that leadership without empathy was emptiness. "Lila," he said quietly, "do you know why you are special?" "Because I ask too many questions?" she teased. "Because you see the world as it could be," he said. "Most adults forget to do that." She smiled, leaning against the glass door. Outside, snowflakes danced like tiny sparks in the light. "Then we will just have to remind them," she said, "one at a time." He nodded, "One at a time." They locked the doors and stepped outside, their breath rising in small clouds. The city lights reflected off the snow, turning everything into a dreamlike glow. As they walked toward the corner where Mary waited with the car, Lila reached up and took his hand without a word. For a long moment, they walked like that, an old soul in a small body, and a man reborn through her kindness. Behind them, the Carter Center stood tall and golden against the dark, its windows shining like open eyes. And somewhere deep inside, Alexander Reed finally understood that redemption was not a destination but a journey made brighter every time someone chose to believe in something good. February arrived quietly, its mornings painted with pale light and the soft chill of snow still clinging to the air. The Carter Center had settled into its rhythm, alive with purpose, and the kind of warmth that comes only from shared effort. Each day began with the sound of doors opening, boots stomping off snow, and voices greeting one another like family. For Alexander Reed, those sounds had become music. He no longer started his mornings in a glass office above the city skyline, but in the heart of a place that breathed life into everyone who entered. On one such morning, he found Lila sitting by the window in the reading room, her sketchbook open and a cup of cocoa beside her. The light from outside framed her small figure, turning her curls into a soft halo. "You are up early again," he said, walking in with his scarf still dusted with snow. "What are you drawing this time?" She looked up and smiled. "Not a building this time," she said. "A bridge," he chuckled. "You love bridges, do you not?" "They make faraway things closer," she said, kind of like people. He sat beside her, peering at the sketch. The bridge she had drawn stretched across a wide river, with two figures meeting in the middle, one tall, one small. "It looks familiar," he said softly. She shrugged. "Maybe it is about us." He smiled faintly, his heart catching at the simplicity of her truth. "Then it is the best bridge I have ever seen." That day, the center was hosting a special event, its first career showcase for the students who had completed training programs. The main hall buzzed with excitement as families arrived, their faces full of hope and pride. Tables were lined with displays of projects, from mechanical models to community safety plans. Lila helped hand out pamphlets, greeting guests with her usual bright energy. "Welcome to the Carter Center," she said to each person who walked through the door, her voice full of warmth. Alexander watched from across the hall, feeling a swell of gratitude. Months ago, he had stood on these same floors with nothing but guilt and memories. Now, he stood among people who had turned his past into something good. The ceremony began with applause. The first graduates received certificates, their names echoing proudly through the hall. Some cried, others laughed, and all of them carried the same spark in their eyes, a belief that life could begin again. When Alexander stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent. "This center was built to honor a man who gave everything to protect others," he said. "But it lives because of the courage of one child who reminded us that truth still matters." He turned slightly toward Lila, who sat in the front row beside her mother, her cheeks glowing pink. "Her voice taught me that even the smallest light can lead us out of the darkest places." The crowd erupted into applause. Lila hid her face in her hands, embarrassed, but her smile could not be contained. After the ceremony, as guests mingled, an older man approached Alexander. "You have done something rare here, Mr. Reed," he said. "You built a place that heals instead of hides." Alexander nodded humbly. "It was never just me." As the evening wound down, the hall emptied except for a few volunteers. Lila stayed behind to help fold chairs. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked as she worked. "Of what?" he asked. "Helping everyone," he smiled. "Sometimes. But then I remember what it felt like when no one helped me. That is what keeps me going." She paused, thinking. "I think helping is like planting," she said. "You do not always see what grows, but you have to keep doing it anyway." He looked at her in wonder. "You really are your father's daughter," she beamed. "Mom says I am half him and half her. Maybe that makes me double good." He laughed, the sound deep and warm. "It certainly does." As they finished stacking chairs, Mary appeared at the doorway, her coat buttoned against the cold. "Lila, it is getting late," she called. "We should go." "Coming, Mom," she said, but then turned to Alexander. "Will you be here tomorrow?" "Of course," he said. "We still have to finish the garden project, remember?" She nodded eagerly. "I will bring the seeds." "Then I will bring the sunlight," he replied with a smile. She giggled. "You cannot bring sunlight." "Watch me," he said, pretending to look serious. As they left, he stood by the door for a moment, watching mother and daughter walk down the snowy street. Their figures grew smaller against the white landscape until they disappeared around the corner. The silence that followed was not heavy, it was peaceful, full of the kind of stillness that only comes when things are right. That night, Alexander walked through the empty building one last time before locking up. The lights reflected off the glass walls, creating 1,000 shimmering reflections of the posters, photographs, and projects that now defined the Carter Center. He paused at the photo wall, where the images of Owen Carter and his own father hung side by side. Beneath them, Lila's poster still glowed faintly under the light. "Courage builds what fear destroys." He touched the frame gently and whispered, "We are still building." As he turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of something new, Lila's bridge drawing, tacked to the corner of the bulletin board. It hung slightly crooked, the pencil lines soft but strong, the two figures still meeting in the middle. He smiled to himself, realizing it was not just a drawing, it was a message. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of a building once born from sorrow, Alexander Reed finally understood that the bridge they had built together did not just connect two people, it connected generations, past and future, through the simple power of love and truth. March arrived with the soft smell of thawing earth, and the distant sound of birds returning. The snow had begun to melt around the Carter Center, leaving patches of green peeking through the soil. The air carried a sense of new beginnings, and inside the building, the hum of daily activity continued. Alexander Reed stood in the main hall one morning, holding a cup of coffee as sunlight streamed through the high windows. Workers moved quietly, setting up tables for the spring workshops. "It feels different today," he said aloud. From behind him came a small voice. "It feels like something is waking up," Lila said, walking in with her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Even the trees look excited," he chuckled. "I think you are right." She dropped her backpack on a nearby chair and opened it to pull out her notebook. "I have been thinking," she began seriously. "Maybe we should have a special day for everyone who comes here, not just to learn things, but to say thank you for what they have already done." Alexander tilted his head, curious. "Like a celebration?" "Yes," she said eagerly. "A day about gratitude. We can call it Thank You Day. People can tell stories about someone who helped them." He smiled. "That sounds like something we all need more of." "Then it is official," she declared. "You are in charge of snacks, and I am in charge of stories." "A fair deal," he said, shaking her hand solemnly. Over the next few weeks, the idea grew. Flyers were printed, volunteers signed up, and a buzz spread through the community. The Carter Center had hosted many events before, but none quite like this one. It was not about achievements or awards, it was about appreciation, about remembering how kindness connected everyone. On the morning of Thank You Day, the center was filled with the smell of coffee and cinnamon bread. Banners hung from the ceiling, each one painted with the words, "We build because we believe." Families arrived with plates of food, workers brought handmade decorations, and children ran through the hall carrying paper hearts with names written on them. Lila stood on a small stage at the front, holding a microphone that was almost too big for her. "Welcome to Thank You Day," she began, her voice steady. "Today we are not here to talk about big things or money or buildings. We are here to talk about people, the ones who listen, who help, who care, because without them, nothing would stand." The crowd clapped softly. Mary smiled from the front row, her eyes bright with pride. Alexander watched from the side, arms crossed, a look of quiet admiration on his face. One by one, people came forward to share their stories. A young man spoke about how he found a job after losing everything. A mother talked about learning to repair heaters so her children would never be cold again. Each story carried the same heartbeat: gratitude. When it was Alexander's turn, he stepped to the stage and took the microphone from Lila. "I did not know what gratitude really meant until a small voice shouted at me one night in a room full of noise," he said. "That voice told me to stop, to listen, and to see what I had been blind to for years." He looked at Lila, who stood near the steps, her hands clasped in front of her. "She reminded me that power means nothing without compassion, and because of her, I stand here not as a man who owns, but as a man who serves." The room was silent, except for the soft creak of the floor. Then applause filled the space, warm and endless. Lila's eyes glistened as she looked down at her shoes, shy but glowing. After the event, as the hall slowly emptied, Alexander found her sitting by the window, watching the last of the afternoon light fade over the city. "You did well today," he said, sitting beside her. "Everyone needed that." "Even you?" she asked, teasing. "Especially me," he said. "You taught me something again." "What did I teach you this time?" "That gratitude is not just saying thank you," he said. "It is living like you mean it." She thought about that, then nodded. "That is a good one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the city faint in the distance. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever think about my dad when we do things like this?" "Every day," he said honestly. "Because everything we build here started with what he stood for." "I think about him too," she said, "but it does not make me sad anymore. It makes me want to keep going." "That is how you honor him," he said quietly, "by living." She leaned her head against the glass. "I hope he knows." "He does," Alexander said. "He has known since the day you spoke the truth." The sun slipped below the horizon, and the city lights began to flicker on. The Carter Center glowed softly behind them, filled with the echoes of laughter and stories that would be remembered long after the night ended. Before leaving, Lila turned to look at the main hall one last time. "You know," she said, "I think Thank You Day should happen every year." Alexander smiled. "Then it will." "Promise?" she asked, holding out her pinky finger. He wrapped his larger hand gently around hers. "Promise." They stepped outside into the cool evening air. The first stars appeared above, faint but clear. For Alexander Reed, they did not look like distant lights anymore. They looked like reminders of second chances, of voices that refused to fade, and of a little girl who turned one man's redemption into a gift for the world. As they walked toward the gate, Lila looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." The wind stirred softly through the trees, carrying her words into the night, as if the world itself whispered back, "You are welcome." Zah. Spring returned in full bloom, carrying the scent of new beginnings through every open window of the Carter Center. The garden that Lila had designed was alive now, the first shoots of green pushing through the soil they had planted months before. The playground echoed with laughter, and bright banners hung from the fences, swaying gently in the breeze. The city had changed too. People spoke about the center as a symbol of hope, a place where compassion rebuilt what greed had once broken. Alexander Reed walked slowly along the path through the garden, hands in his coat pockets, watching the children play. His steps were slower these days, not from age but from reflection. Every sound, every face reminded him of how far they had come. From the doorway, Lila's voice carried across the yard. "Mr. Reed, you forgot your gloves again." He turned and laughed as she ran toward him, waving the gloves in one hand. "You will catch a cold," she scolded gently, sounding far older than her years. "You sound like my mother," he teased. "She says that means I am smart," Lila replied, grinning. "And right," he added, taking the gloves. "Always right," she said proudly. They sat together on a bench near the new greenhouse. Inside, rows of small plants reached for the sunlight, their leaves trembling in the soft wind. "It is almost 1 year since you started this place," she said thoughtfully. "Almost," he said. "Does it feel like a long time to you?" She shook her head. "It feels fast, but I think that is what happens when something good is growing." "You are right again," he said, smiling. "Growth has its own sense of time." She opened her sketchbook, which was nearly full now. "I am drawing every season here," she explained. "Winter, spring, summer, and fall. So that one day, if people forget how it started, they can see how it kept going." He watched her draw, her small hands steady and focused. "That is a beautiful idea," he said softly. "Maybe we should put your drawings in the lobby, like a timeline." Her eyes lit up. "Really? People would see them every day?" "Every single day," he said. "They would remind everyone that even small beginnings can turn into something great." Later that afternoon, a reporter visited the center to interview Alexander for a national feature about community rebuilding. The woman was polite, professional, but her questions carried a quiet curiosity. "Mr. Reed," she said, "you were once known as one of the most ruthless businessmen in the state. What changed you?" He paused before answering, glancing through the window where Lila was showing a group of children how to plant flowers. "A little girl did," he said simply. The reporter looked surprised. "One child changed all this?" "She changed me," he said, "and that was enough to change everything else." When the article was published a week later, it spread far beyond the city. Donations arrived from across the country. Messages poured in: letters, emails, handwritten notes, all from people inspired by the story of a man who had been saved by a child's courage. One letter stood out. It was from a small town in Illinois, written in neat cursive. It read, "Thank you for reminding us that kindness can build more than concrete ever will." Alexander kept it on his desk beside Lila's first drawing of the Carter Center. A few days later, he called a meeting with the staff. "We have been given enough funding to open 3 more centers," he announced. The room erupted in cheers. Lila, who had been sitting in the back, jumped up. "Can I name one of them?" she asked. "What would you call it?" he asked. "The Bridge," she said confidently, "because that is what you are building between people." He smiled. "Then the bridge it is." Over the next several weeks, work began on the expansion. Lila visited the new sites with him, her excitement contagious. She carried a small camera, taking pictures of the empty lots, the workers, the beams being raised into place. One day, she said, we will fill the whole country with places that help people. That is a big dream, he said. It is your kind of dream, she replied. On the drive back to the city, the car passed the river where her father had once worked. Lila pressed her hand against the window, her voice soft. I think my dad would like that name too, the bridge. He would love it, Alexander said. He started it, after all. She turned to look at him. You mean we did? He nodded. We did. That evening, the sun set behind the skyline, painting the sky in orange and gold. The Carter Center glowed in the fading light, its glass walls reflecting the city that had once doubted it could heal. Inside, the laughter of children drifted down the halls, blending with the soft hum of machines and the rustle of papers. Lila sat in the reading room, finishing her last page of sketches. When she was done, she closed the book and looked out the window at the lights flickering along the street. Mr. Reed, she called as he walked by, do you think things stay good forever? He stopped, thinking. No, he said gently, but good things last longer than bad ones because people remember them. She smiled, satisfied with that answer. Then we will keep reminding them, she said. That is the plan, he replied. As the night deepened, he turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the glow from the garden outside. The seeds they had planted months ago stood strong now, small but determined, reaching upward. And as Alexander Reed stepped outside, locking the door behind him, he realized that what had begun as redemption had grown into something larger legacy. A legacy built not from wealth, but from one child's unwavering belief that the truth could heal the world. The following summer arrived bright and full of promise, the kind of season that seemed to hum with quiet joy. The Carter Center stood at the heart of the city like a living monument, its walls lined with green vines and sunlight pouring through the tall windows. Inside, every room was alive with laughter, learning, and the sound of people building their futures. The greenhouse flourished with color, the garden bloomed wider than anyone imagined, and the sign above the front entrance now bore a second line beneath its name, founded in honor of truth and compassion. Alexander Reed stood near the entrance one morning, watching as a new group of trainees arrived. They looked nervous but hopeful, just like those who had come before them. He smiled as he greeted them, shaking hands, offering words of encouragement, and remembering how different his life had once been. Behind him, a familiar voice called out, "You forgot your notebook again, Mr. Reed." He turned to see Lila running up the steps, her curls bouncing, and her ever-present sketchbook tucked under one arm. "You are my memory now," he said, laughing as he took the notebook from her. "Someone has to make sure you do not lose your ideas," she replied, beaming. She was taller now, her confidence stronger, her presence brighter. Though still a child, she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who understood the weight of goodness. "I have something for you," she said suddenly, pulling a folded sheet from her bag. "It is a letter." "For me?" he asked, surprised. "It is for later," she said, "when the day is done." He nodded, curious but patient. They spent the day together overseeing activities, the planting in the garden, the workshops in the hall, the laughter that filled the new playground. The rhythm of life at the center moved like a heartbeat, steady and full of purpose. By afternoon, the sky turned golden, and a soft breeze carried the scent of flowers across the courtyard. As the final event of the day ended, Alexander sat on a bench near the garden, watching the sun dip low. Lila joined him, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "It is perfect," she said, looking around. "It feels like everything is exactly how it should be." "It does," he agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real." "It is real because we built it," she said firmly, "and because people believed in it." He nodded slowly. "You were right from the start, you know. The world did need a place like this." "The world needs people like you too," she said. "The ones who listen." The air grew quieter as evening settled, and Lila handed him the folded letter she had given him earlier. "You can open it now," she said softly. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, in her neat handwriting, were just a few lines. "Dear Mr. Reed, I wrote this because I know one day I will grow up, and maybe I will move away, but I want you to remember something. You did not just save lives, you changed hearts. You taught everyone that listening is how people love. So when I am older and building my own bridge somewhere, I want you to know you already helped me cross the first one. Love, Lila." He looked at the letter for a long time, his throat tight, his heart full. "You have no idea what this means to me," he said finally. "I think I do," she replied, smiling. "It means you are proud." "More than proud," he said. "Grateful." The sky deepened into shades of pink and violet, and lights flickered on inside the center. Families began to leave, waving their goodbyes. Lila and her mother stood by the gate, ready to head home. Mary smiled at Alexander. "You have given her a future," she said. "No," he replied. "She gave one to me." Lila ran back for one last hug. "Promise you will keep going," she said, looking up at him. "Promise you will keep listening." He knelt so their eyes met. "As long as I am alive," he said, "I will listen." "Then I will keep talking," she said with a laugh. "That seems fair," he said. She turned and waved as she walked away, her small figure glowing under the streetlights. Alexander stood there until they disappeared around the corner, the letter still in his hand. The night grew still, the kind of stillness that carries peace rather than emptiness. He walked back inside the building and looked around one last time. The photo wall had grown pictures of students, volunteers, and families filled every inch. At the center of it all was Lila's drawing of the bridge, framed and surrounded by flowers pressed between glass. Beneath it, in her handwriting, were 4 words that seemed to echo through the quiet hall. "Kindness builds forever." Alexander touched the glass lightly, his reflection overlapping with hers. Then he whispered, "Thank you, Lila." Years later, the Carter Center expanded across the country, its name becoming a symbol of hope. People who never met Alexander Reed still spoke of his vision, a place where compassion guided strength, and every person mattered. But those who knew the truth remembered the real story, that it all began with one girl who saw what others could not, who shouted when silence could have cost a life, and who believed that kindness was not weakness but power. In the garden of the original center, the greenhouse still stood, and every spring, new flowers bloomed around a small bronze plaque. It read, "In honor of those who listen, and those brave enough to speak." And beneath those words, the names of 2 people were engraved side by side: Owen Carter and Lila. When the sun rose each morning, its light touched that plaque first, then spread through the garden, across the playground, and into the halls of the Carter Center. The world outside kept moving, changing, rushing forward, but inside that quiet corner of the city, the legacy of kindness continued to grow, and if you stood there long enough, you could almost hear it, the echo of a child's voice saying, "You kept your promise,